for coming and listening to my lecture this morning, which will be a Sherlock Holmes-like one, and I hope that afterwards we will have a good discussion. Because when I saw the crown for the first moment on, it created me headaches. And I will show you why. In 1910, Nicola I Petrovich Njegos was crowned the first king of Montenegro. The coronation was considered a symbolic act because it was performed with the crown of Stefan III Nemanjić, better known as Saint Stefan Decanski. He was king of Rascia from 1321 to 1332. Nicola I Petrovich Njegos defined himself thereby as a guardian of the idea of a medieval Serbian state which guided the policy of the Nemanjić. The Nemanjić were the most important Serbian ruler dynasty of the Middle Ages. Under their rule, Serbia not only became a sovereign kingdom, but in the 14th century also rose to become the militarily, politically, and culturally dominant power of the Western Balkans. Moreover, the progenitor of the dynasty, the Beata Stirps of the Nemanjić, Stefan Nemanja, was born after 1113 in Zeta, today's Lignica, near Podgorica in Montenegro. In 1784, at Sremski Karlovci, the Metropolitan of Karlovac, Moisi Putnik, used the crown of Stefan Decanski to ordain the Montenegrin Bishop Petar I Petrovich Njegos. At the time of King Nikola I Petrovich Njegos, the crown was kept in the monastery of St. Petar Petrovich Njegos in Cetinje, where it can still be found today. The crown in Cetinje is considered to be the only remaining medieval crown from the Nemanjić dynasty. A noteworthy feature is the shape of the crown as well as its heterogeneous elements. Furthermore, most of the semi-precious stones do not show the typical cabochon or table cuts of the period between 1321 and 1331. Aside from that, the gemstones are pierced and sawn on like the rose quartz, which had no meaning in medieval material iconography, or mounted like the aquamarines in box setting, which are later variations. Here, these are completely new. That means in their forms after 1750. And here the stones are sawn and perforated. This is absolutely no medieval technique to fix a semi-precious stone. The brooch-like jewel rendered over the forehead is an entirely modern piece. I'm speaking about this here. A large rubellite sparkles in the center, surrounded by the 8 smaller ones, which form a wreath around it. Rubellites of this size and luminosity came from the Russian part of the Urals. During her reign, Catherine the Great commissioned the exploration of Siberia, and the so-called Siberian ruby, and here we have a lot of Siberian rubies, were discovered. Almost ruby red, this rubellite was a rarity coveted around the world. So far I have not been able to find out in which context this brooch-like piece of the jewelry originally belonged before it was attached to the crown. It's unthinkable by the cut and the mounts before 760. The small facet cuts of the rubellis, like the few aquamarines scattered over St. Stephen's crown, was developed in the 18th century. Yes. I mean here, these facets cut, and this turns here. Here you have the same mounts and the same cuts. The small facet cut of the rubellis, like the few aquamarines scattered over St. Stephen's crown, was developed in the 18th century. Parallel to St. Stefan's crown in Cetinje, there are corresponding cut stones under the trimming of the mitre number TK51 here. In the Moscow Kremlin. The enamels date from the end of the 17th century, but the stones and their arrangement are part of a 19th century revision. Here you have the same cuts you find on the mitre in Cetinje. The background enamels are, in my opinion, of Rostov origin, because the morning versions followed. Oh no, now I give something. I beg your pardon. Similarly, the oval background enamels are in the technique of peinture sur émail, which was developed in the first third of the 17th century. One can identify the Virgin, John the Baptist, and Christ, ergo a deesis. It is possible to identify the enamel of a Saint Peter here. This is running in the literature as an unknown Saint Peter, but based on the evolution of the abbreviation in the inscription, this is St. Peter I Petrovich Njegos. In 1834, the Serbian Orthodox Church canonized him as St. Peter of Cetinje. That means here and round, the enamels, the most early date for the enamels is 1834 or later. The pearl embroideries early refer to the four large enamels, which indicates that the arrangement of the appliques together with the pearl embroidery is to be placed after 1834. Consequently, Lydia Stankovic was absolutely right when she noted in 2014, quote, "Unfortunately, the authenticity of the crown has been undermined in the past century by addition of the medallions of modern Russian style," unquote. The black ground enamels are, in my opinion, of Rostov origin because the Morning Virgin follows a type found on an enamel crucifixion in the technique of a Rostov finift from the end of the 18th century. And you see, this is more or less identical. Over the Virgin is an applique in the form of a stylus tulip made in silver filigree. I'm speaking about this part here. Upon closer inspection, it turns out to be the fragment of a clasp, as I found a similar and complete one in the collections of the Victoria and Albert Museum in London, dating from the first half of the 19th century, and we are again in the 19th century. Here I enlarged it, the detail, there. And here we have these clasps in the Victorian Albert Museum, and I turned our piece around 90 degrees to make it similar. Throughout the lands of the former Ottoman Empire, from the North Balkans to the Caucasus, large and elaborate waist clasps were the most important item in a woman's dowry. These clasps overcome in a small number of basic shapes. This one is shaped like a stylized tulip, a favorite Ottoman motif. It was worn with the pointed part facing upwards, and it was fastened by a pin which attached the right-hand piece to the rest of the clasp. Here I unfasten it. The two chains which join the pin to the clasp hung down decoratively over the front of the clasp when it was fastened. The piece of the Victorian Albert Museum was described as Circassian when it was acquired in 1854, but it's more likely to come from Turkey itself or the Balkans. The fine filigree and the use of enamel on the central bosses and the pendants on the chain suggested that it may have been made by a Greek or Armenian silversmith. The Armenians were very famous for their silverwork in the 19th century. They were widely dispersed outside their homeland in the South Caucasus and produced jewelry, particularly filigree, in traditional styles from many other nationalities and faiths. The Victorian Albert Museum, here the next piece, has a second one with three chains which join the pin to the clasp, hung down decoratively over the front of the clasp when it was fastened. This one is dated between 1750 and 1850. Tulip-shaped filigree clasps were also worn in some of the Greek islands and on the west coast of the Balkans. But those are usually smaller and less decorative than Cypriot clasps. The crown in Cetinje is a mixtum compositum of fragments which explains why there is such a close resemblance to the red mitre of the Historical Museum in Moscow. The crown itself is from the beginning of the 19th century, whereas the appliques are from the 17th, the 18th and the 19th century. You see, these are more or less twins. Here the lower band is missing. It's cut here, and I will show you the fragments which are here well preserved, where they have been fixed on the crown of Stefan Decanski. The crown of Stefan Decanski at Cetinje thus turns out to be not a secular crown, but just like its counterparts in Moscow, an Orthodox mitre, which however was shortened by 2-finger thwaites at the lower band. I mean that here. This is missing there. Here I show you the mitre we saw again just some slides before of number TK51, and here I want to make a confront, have a closer look to these appliques I cut out and enlarged here. And you have these forms, oops. Thanks. Yes, you have these forms here, this is one of the bands of the crown of Stefan Decanski. And you see these settings are irregularly. They changed something, and I think they recycled these little plackets from the lower band and they put them there. I show you some other example. Here. I need that red pointer. This is the detail of the lower band with these little plackets in diamond form, and here you have the same. And here, and here. And now this spectacular piece of the last quarter of the 17th century, and I cut out here the lower band, and you will see the pomegranates here, which form settings for rubies, are more or less identical with the crown of Stefan Decanski. Unfortunately, this became a little bit dark, but I think you can see it. These are really like twins. So after my opinion, these parts here originally adorned the lower band of the mitre, which was cut away, I think, at the beginning of the 19th century. Now let's have a look to these pipes here. Between the enamels, we have that kind of pipes adorned with semi-precious and precious stones. You have the same ornaments here on this mitre from the early 19th century, but these must be very much older. I show you why. They have recycled them. Here I enlarged it. Here we have these pipes. And now I cut it out, this one, and I made it in confront to these pipes from the crown of Stefan Decanski. And you see it's more or less identical. I think these are the eldest parts of the crown from around 1700 or between 1650 and 1700. So we have these as ornaments just in the first half of the 17th century. Here, this really breathtaking mitre, which was donated by Mikhail Petrovich to the Assumption Cathedral in Rostov in 1634. And here you have this ornament, these pipes here, framed by pearls. I cut it out here and put it in confront to the ornaments of the crown in Cetinje. Such spikes are, as I said, decorative elements and typical for Moscow goldsmith works of the 17th century. They are found on the edges of the book covers of the Gospels of 1678 in the National Museum of the Kremlin in Moscow. Here you have the, here I have the front, and here you have these pikes. Here in pairs, here in thirds, and I enlarged it here. And you see it's more or less identical with that we found in Cetinje on the so-called ground. In summary, the base of the crown in Cetinje is a mitre whose present appearance with the arrangement of pearls, embroidery, stones and enamels is a composition from the period after 1834, the year of the canonization of Peter of Cetinje. The rubellites of the jewel centered over the forehead are conceivable only in the second half of the 18th century because of their facet cut and also because of their discovery of their occurrence in Siberia during the development of this area under Catherine the Great. Only the azure-worked appliques decorated with rubies must have been made in Moscow around 1700, as they have their counterparts in the Moscow goldsmith art of the second half of the 17th and the beginning of the 18th century. Thank you very much for your kind attention.
Thank you very much. It's a really interesting presentation. Any questions or remarks?
Oh yes, please do so.